All right, welcome back again, everyone. I am Bob Cohn, your moderator for today's conversation. If you're just joining us, I am also going to contribute to the next presentation, and it is one that is near and dear to my heart, optimizing for the cloud. I'm going to ask Mr. Eric Polet to assist me with this. You know, we've talked about this already when we've talked about backup, when we've talked about archive. Cloud is just simply becoming a part of virtually everything we do today. So it's a good time to stop and look at the cloud and understand, okay, as we get into it, how do we make sure that we optimize for each element that we're trying to achieve? So with that, Eric, let's kick this thing off. You've got an analogy that you like to use for the cloud. Share that with us.
Yeah, it's kind of like a buffet. You really are presented with a ton of different options that are out there. And it can be overwhelming, similar to when you walk into a buffet. So what do you need to do? You need to identify needs. When you're hungry, what is it that it's going to fill you up? Do you need the starches? Do you need this and that? What is it? And not everybody's needs are the same. Bob, when you and I go to a buffet, we're going to have very different things. And our plates are going to look different because we have different needs. The cloud is the same thing. And it really is. It is a buffet menu of options, from storage that you can see with Glacier, S3, to the services that Steve and Chris mentioned previously of artificial intelligence and compute and analytics. The reason people are so thrilled about the cloud, it is the services that you can get out of it. But as we talk about that difference in people's plates, difference in everything else, storage is a big part of the cloud. And it's something that I guess sometimes feels like it's pushed off to the backside of it. But when we look at a hybrid cloud specifically, something that's a bigger picture and a true end-to-end workflow, it's important to understand both sides of the coin. So as we progress down this, I know, Bob, you're going to go into this a little bit more on the different services, from storage to infrastructure as a service and everything like that. So
I guess, you know, if you go back to that picture just for a second, as I look at this, one thing that I'm guilty of when I go to a buffet is taking way too much food on my plate, and you don't put it back. So that is kind of like storage, and that's a tricky part of the cloud, I think, and that's what we really want to dive into today is how we optimize the cloud for our storage, because it's easy once you start getting it and putting it on your plate. It's good to just leave it there, and unlike a buffet where you're walking away and leaving, you know, one price, there's cost, there's just the complexity of how much you've stored out there, access to get it back, things of that nature. So that's a good thing to look at when you look at optimizing the cloud, is what are you doing with storage?
Yeah, and another thing that Steve pointed out too that I really liked, the one size doesn't fit all. I mean, it's not just one thing for everybody. And Bob, you always said cloud is not this monolithic thing. It is this bigger picture, and it's not one size fits all. So there really is a way of finding that sweet spot and optimizing the cloud, entering it with confidence, knowing that what you're doing is the best overall solution for you while you balance all of these other things that we're going to start to talk about.
Right. Now let's look at some of those services that you can opt for. You know, when we look at this screen on the left, what you see is what is now referred to as a private cloud. That's on-premise storage and data, and running your data center. Today, it's interesting that you can do that with all of the infrastructure of cloud. Object storage in your data center on-prem, communication via HTTP protocols, formatting via S3 for interface. So there's a way to take your own data center and make it look very much like a cloud. On the other side, the far right side of the screen, we see software as a service, SaaS. These two are what everybody pretty much is working with, and to some extent today. And if you look at these, the blue and the gray bars denote In blue, how much do you manage? And in gray, how much do others manage for you? So you see with software as a service, they've got the application. They're keeping it updated. They're running it on whatever or servers it needs to run on. The only thing you're doing is logging in and manipulating the data of that software. We've got a lot that falls in between this. So the other three that I want to look at are platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and then just an outright storage cloud. Now you see how the responsibilities get divvied up between these different types of services. Just really quickly, platform as a service typically is if you are a large developer and you need a tremendous amount of compute power to run development, maybe it's of a new software application, and once that application is developed and created, you're no longer going to need any of that infrastructure. That's platform as a service, very commonly used for something like that. Infrastructure as a service is this concept of we're going to the cloud. We're going to put everything in the cloud. That is my data center in a cloud. Now, the truth of it is, it doesn't mean you no longer have a data center or IT people. There's still a lot of back and forth and complexity working with that. And then the storage cloud is what I usually equate to your smartphone. You have a smartphone and it's getting backed up every night into the cloud. The data is created outside of the cloud and then you're moving it into the cloud. I would argue for a straight out storage cloud, the iPhone or the Android or whatever your smartphone is, that's probably the best application for it. As your data comes into hundreds of terabytes or petabytes, that becomes a little more complicated. And what I would really say when you look at these, and you see the blue and gray bars, who's responsible for what? Along the bottom, all those storage bars were gray. I would change them to blue because, as Matt Starr said when we talked about backup and recovery, and as was also mentioned in archive, there's no cloud service that guarantees the retrieval of your data. You may get credit for hours used or space used, but they can't and won't guarantee that your data comes back. So where you put your data does not alleviate your responsibility for it. So when I look at these different offerings, I deem storage as something that you're always responsible for. Eric, would you have a comment on that?
I mean, I agree fully. I mean, even if somebody else is physically storing that for you in the cloud, you have to understand your SLAs that are attached to it. You have to understand, am I going to tier it off? Is this new level accessible? And we'll get into some of that as we get down the road. But you're exactly right. Even when it is technically managed by someone else, they're just executing your decisions that you're asking to do. So you're paying someone to take care of it for you, but it's still your decisions. You are the one managing it, planning it out, and facing the consequences if it's done incorrectly down the road as well.
Great. So what we have basically is a balancing act, and storage optimization goes a long way. Eric, you talked about the plates and how our plates might look different. This is kind of an example of that on a case-by-case scenario for customers.
And it's a balance of everything. It's what do you need as an organization? Because everybody's going to look different. Everybody's workflow is going to look different. Their needs and their challenges are going to be different. Why they want to go to the cloud. Maybe they're being forced to come down from up above. They're having a cloud mandate, or they just think that it's the new thing. Everybody's going to the cloud. I got to do it. Or they have true need and desire because there are services and applications that are running in the cloud that they have to. So not are you only balancing this local storage, this cloud storage, but maybe it's more than one cloud that you're even balancing, because some clouds have specific services that other ones don't. We talk a lot about Amazon because it is the king of the clouds at this point in time, but there are many other clouds out there that SpectraLIVE works with. We work with, Azure and Wasabi and as well as Amazon and things like that. So depending on the integration, depending on the partnership, the software packages, whether you're doing StoreCycle and Black Pearl or one of those bigger ones that Chris talked about, the Architectas and things like that, options are available. So it's the balance that turns into, what were you going to say? Sorry, Bob.
Well, I was just going to say, and you mentioned you might even have multiple clouds in that balance that you're working between. Yeah.
And that truly is this balance, which is a connection between the on-prem, the public cloud, multiple public clouds. it's a hybrid cloud. And one thing that's really important too, it's not just having both. Having cloud storage, having cloud resources, services that you're using, and having on-prem infrastructure and storage does not make it a hybrid cloud. When those two are integrated, when you have the ability to leverage local storage in cloud services, that's when the hybrid cloud truly starts to reap its benefits.
Right, and that's, I think there's a lot to be said for that, because if you want to balance between these clouds and look for optimization, one of the best ways to do it is to have something on-prem that helps you as that counterbalance. And this is where we talk about, you know, SLAs, what's your service level agreement? What's the time to get the data back? I mean, that is going to vary tremendously based on different situations, scenarios, types of data. So I like your point that when you define a hybrid cloud, it's not just the fact that I have some data on premise and I have some data up in the cloud, but that I can actually communicate between those two, work with both of them, and reach to the appropriate one at the appropriate time. And that's a bit of the hat trick, I think.
Yeah. And so it's like, if we just look at storage, so, I mean, we've been talking about storage, and if we kind of look at that at a glance, it's not just one thing again. There are multiple different ones. If we look at the purple, this is the S3 storage, as they call it. It's more of your instant access. So this is what you're going to be running those cloud services against. If you're doing AI, the data is going to be coming out of there. This is your active cloud storage. And then you have the gray area in the middle there. That's your infrequent access. A lot of times it's kind of like a landing zone. So when you need to move over to that cold storage, you know, Amazon Glacier, we hear so much about $1 a terabyte a month. It's super cheap. But there's so many caveats that go along with it. When you start to look at how long you need to keep the data there, when it's 90 to 180 day minimum requirements, but then how long to get it back? You can be waiting 12 to 24 hours to get the data back out of the cloud at that point in time, to land in this gray area, to then have it accessible by this purple area. So it's a lot of moving back and forth. And again, this is something where it's that kind of that blue box that you change down below. Storage is being managed. Other people are moving this around, but you have to dictate where it's moving, when it's moving there, and why. And then you have to keep in the back of your mind, there's one more kind of tricky thing. There are a lot of costs associated as you move in and out and throughout the cloud.
And Eric, I often hear these referred to as tolls. Is that the terminology here? So toll charges, and that's something you don't hear much about.
It isn't. So number 4 here, this is what you hear all the time. How much does it cost to store per gigabyte? We hear it all the time. Pennies, half a cent, 3 cents a gig, you know.
1/10 of a cent.
Yeah, 1/10 of a cent. These are the numbers that are thrown out there. It's all the other stuff that just has to be kept in mind. It's not that it's bad that they're there, but a hybrid cloud is the way that you can then optimize this. Because if you need larger restores, you can do that locally, where you don't have to wait the time. You don't have to pay the extra amount. But if you want to leverage the cloud services, where if you have a specific need or a desire to use something in the cloud for artificial intelligence or transcoding or distribution, you can leverage it for that. Use it for what it's good at. Optimize your overall workflow. And that's really where it comes in. The tolls that's a great way of putting it, because I think actually Dropbox, they're the ones that came up with that. They went 100% cloud, and they had to pull back because of what their CTO called the Amazon tolls. And they were just hard to prepare for. And so, you know, we've tried to help by coming up with some tools to help prepare people to understand a little bit more about the cloud. This is a quick screenshot, and actually I have it. Yeah,
I love the comment on that. Let's rub some math on it. That comes from Mr. Matt Starr, CTO. You know, this is really all still just a numbers game, and there is nothing wrong with an organization charging for a quality service. That's how business is typically defined, but it's understanding how those charges work, what you're doing, and as Eric just said, optimizing your workflow against this pricing measure and making sure that you're coming out with something that is on budget as planned and still meets all the requirements that your organization has.
Yeah.
So let's jump to that calculator. Okay.
Yeah, and it's great because when we do look at some of these things, it's, this is that balance. This is the big balancing act of making sure that everything is working correctly, because large restores, as we can see here in a second, are going to cost you a lot more money, take you a lot more time. Do that locally. That golden copy that Chris and Steve kept mentioning is a fantastic thing, because that really frees you up and gives you the ability to move and go wherever you want. Talk about that here in a second as well. But this is something that we will share with everybody after the fact. This is all public information. We just grabbed the Amazon pricing structure on their website exactly as you can get it, but put it into an easier to understand format. Because again, one of the things that's tough to understand is that big menu. When you see it all at once, broken down, it's a little bit easier. So we can look at capacity. We put in 2 petabytes here. We've seen this as a pretty good backup size for a lot of our customers when they have multiple copies of backups, things like that, with data growth. And we gave you a cheat sheet here, which is nice, so that you can break down the Amazon costs in a more tangible way of cost per terabyte per year rather than gigabyte per month. So a little bit more of an apples to apples comparison.
Eric, although we're using the Amazon prices here as a guide, anything in those yellow boxes can be changed. So if you are working with Wasabi or Azure or any of the number of different cloud providers out there, this is a great tool and calculator to play with.
Yeah, like Wasabi, that's a great example. For Wasabi, this would be $0. They don't charge you to access the data. Theirs is a storage cloud that has free restores. So this would be zeroed out in their case. So great. That's a great point, Bob. And this is flexible to be built and used in a general cloud infrastructure whenever you want to look at it. And then we give you breakdowns of how much you're going to pay in a total TCO versus just your retrieval versus just your storage. We kind of break it down and give you different sections that you can look at. We're not going to go into big detail about how this works or anything like that, or go through a bunch of examples. This is something that you can use with Spectra reps to have an intelligent cloud conversation and prepare for what's coming up. Because again, understanding the cloud, optimizing for it is what's going to make it successful. Going in with confidence to really benefit your organization. It provides tremendous amounts of business efficiencies when you can get into the cloud. And if you can do it right, you can do it affordably and very effectively. And I think,
Eric, if you slide back over to that calculator again, just real quickly, a comment I want to make, and I hope everyone will download this and play with it. We just dropped a link to it in the chat box, so you should have that. And again, it'll go out with the thank you email. But this also talks about how much are you going to be retrieving or restoring on a monthly basis. And that's where you'll see that 2% that we've got it hit here. That's where you can actually guesstimate what your restoration charges are going to be. And that's the scary thing. So yeah, if you're doing a disaster recovery from the cloud, that's going to be big. But don't forget that there are things that get backed up that do need to be pulled back. Look, it's a great place to start. On average, are you pulling back 10% of your backup set per month, 1%, 2%? Drop that number in, and suddenly Eric just put 50%, and you will see the monthly cost of retrievals and the yearly cost of retrievals will change, and it can be astronomical if it's a large amount of data and a large percentage. Or maybe you can look at that and say, no, this is what we can allow, and then you can set quotas. You can set the expectation for your users so that they know what to expect about how much, what your goals are to not only store in the cloud but bring back from the cloud. So again, I'm a sucker for a calculator. You might be able to tell, but that's a fun one to play with.
Yeah, it is. And it really segues well into best practices, because that's really all we're here to talk about. I mean, optimizing the cloud, it is a set of best practices that one size doesn't fit all. It's not perfectly cookie cutter to everybody, but if you take the broad strokes and really figure it out, like one of my 2 favorites that I have on here, Bob, the start small but think big. get into the cloud. Yeah, I mean, use storage, use things like that, but think big. Think about ways that you can leverage those services, the analytics, the AI, you know, all these machine learning things that are going on, Hadoop clusters that can run in the cloud. You can do so much with your data, gain so much out of it. I mean, the majority of our customers, data is the lifeblood of their organization. And without that, they really don't have anything. So how do you use it? And not everyone can afford a giant supercomputer. So, you know, it's great to have that ability to start small, go big, look at the bigger picture that you want to achieve, but, you know, gradually get there. That one's my favorite. And then I think the one that we've heard a little bit about already is the golden copy. It provides freedom. It really does. You never have to be locked into anything. You never have to even ask yourself, is restoring this data worth this amount of money? You never have to figure that balance out, because if you can restore it locally, it's always going to be free and it's always going to be fast.
Right.
Do you have any favorites that you have, Bob?
Well, you know, I've got to go with the golden copy as well. And it's also the fact that you can think a little differently about this. If you are also using the cloud, now my golden copy might not be an hourly backup. I might be snapshotting to the cloud and depending on that to retrieve files. But if I have a problem, then I've got the backup to my backup. Simple, easy way to do it. So it might be a daily backup. It might be a weekly backup. That's where you can play and kind of weigh it to, you know, I'm 95% sure I can get it back from this method. It'll be quick. It'll be easy. But if I get in that 5%, that could take me down if it's much bigger or a complete DR. That allows me to have this other option on-prem that I can pull from, even if it's a day old. If I lose a day of data, if you're a big transactional company, as SpectraLOGIC is, you lose a day of data, that's still a big hit, but it's a lot better than losing my data. So with that golden copy, you get everything. The ransomware, the ability to decide if one cloud provider is suddenly charging too much. You don't have to bring your data back. If you've got a golden copy, you simply stop that copy in the cloud, and then you've still got the data that you can send to the next cloud provider. So it also keeps the cloud providers honest when you have that. Eric used the word leverage, and that's my favorite word in this conversation, is when you have that leverage, there's a lot of things you can do and a lot of places you can go with it. Yeah. And one of the things that we kind of boiled a lot of this down to, you know, it's just a thing that you can kind of do a self-audit of, why am I going to the cloud? What am I looking to do? How can I optimize the cloud? And these are great things to look at and have a conversation with a rep of ours. I mean, we are here to help you decide what it is that works best for you. It may not be anything that involves SpectraLOGIC. It may just be a little piece of store cycle or one of our software packages that helps you get your foot in the cloud. But understand all of it, because as you start small, go big, the better you understand it, the better you can optimize yourself for the cloud, and the more confidence you have when you get into the cloud situations. All right. And we have, it looks like, 2 questions written in that we will try to get to real quickly here. I think we're on time. It says, you mentioned access of data a few times. Do you think it's viable to keep a DR copy in the cloud if you need to bring it all back? What's the access for that look like? Actually, it's funny. We kind of had something like that. You have that reference slide, Eric? Yeah, I do. Can you grab that and pull it up? Yeah. There we go. Okay, that's it. We talked about this earlier and cut it for time, but we've got a couple of minutes. This is bandwidth of access bandwidth. So how long will it take you to retrieve across a WAN, a wide area network? So what is your pipe that's going into the cloud and coming back from the cloud? So if you're like Spectra, we run our whole organization off of a gigabit Ethernet. It's dedicated. It's not a shared loop like you might have at home. So it's pretty fast. But if we were to try to move a petabyte of data, if we had a huge disaster recovery we had to perform at a gigabit Ethernet, that would take 92 days. So over 3 months to bring that data back, which typically is not viable. International War Museum in the UK is one of our customers. They recently were doing an interview, and the fellow there mentioned they use gigabit Ethernet, and that was one of his problems with doing large repositories in the cloud, was it would be limiting. Now, you might have much faster access. One of the things you want to think about is when you're bringing back large amounts of data is, of course, what is that service level agreement? If you look at any of these numbers versus a local copy, and we're using tape in this example, but it could even be much faster if it were a disk archive on site, but a local premise copy, a single LTO drive rivals most of these bandwidths. If you have 4 LTO drives, it would beat the bandwidth of any that we're showing here. And 4 LTO drives is not a lot of tape drives. So that's, again, where you want to balance, you want to optimize and make sure you've got the performance in place that meets your SLA. And if you're changing, if you're suddenly going to the cloud or changing how much you're going to put in the cloud versus on-prem, making sure those SLAs are communicated out to your users, I think is one of the most important things as well, so that you set that expectation.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Eric?
Yeah, as I jump back to this, it's that recovery time and point objective. It's understanding how long do I have to restore everything? Because as you mentioned, Bob, it's not, you have to think ahead of time, because I can't call up our internet provider and double my bandwidth at the drop of a hat. It takes, potential of running new lines to our building, things like that. If you really had a major change and you had to upgrade your pipe to something different, it doesn't happen very quickly. It's a lot faster for us to send a couple tape drives to you, and you pop them into your library, you license those, and you go. So it's understanding the recovery time and point objectives to know, what do I need? What do I need in this total workflow? And also, one of our other favorite one is, the cloud is a good place to keep a DR copy, because it's off-site and away, it's not a good one to restore from. It's just too expensive.
And even though it may sound a little counterintuitive to say, consider a DR copy in the cloud, but never touch it, that is an example of when you hear of organizations that are backing up to 3 or 4 different places, that is part of the strategy. We have a backup copy in the cloud, and it may be really expensive to get it, and it may take a long time to get it back. But if our other programs fail, we have that as a backup to the backup. And we see more and more organizations actually doing that. Yeah. If given the option between losing content that can never be created again versus getting it back but having to wait a month, we're going to take the lesser of 2 evils, wait a month. Yeah. So that could be a viable strategy as well. Yeah. All right, second question, and it looks like that's it for now, but keep writing if you have another one. It says, you mentioned on-prem and off-prem have to be connected. What is your suggestion for that?
Yeah.
Big question. A lot of options.
A lot going to be a software. I mean, it's always going to be some type of software that's going to help you move data into the cloud, have a local copy, Store Cycle and Black Pearl that we had heard about in the packs out there that can help you manage both on-prem and local storage. And again, it's finding what's best for you.
And Eric, I think you were freezing up for just a second there, but to reiterate that, it's definitely finding the solution that works for you. And there are a lot of different options. You heard how Spectra does it with Black Pearl and Store Cycle, so that you can get that single pane of glass that sees both sides and can manage both sides. There are other solutions out there as well. So again, when we're looking at that checklist and things that we want to shop for, make sure that's part of what you consider. And it looks like that is the last question, and we are right on time. So thank you, Eric. We are going to draw for a winner. And let's see, Katie, do we have a winner for this session?
Yes, indeed we do. It is Andrew Indovina.
Okay, Andrew, congratulations. And okay, I'm going to take one last question since we have 1 minute that just came in, and it says, I missed part of this. What is the difference between a DR and a golden copy? Okay, the way we're using it, disaster recovery, DR copy would simply be a complete set of basically everything you can have. So in a disaster, a complete wipeout, you can bring it back. By golden copy, that DR copy could be your golden copy. If you have an archive, that could be the golden copy. Basically, what we mean when we say golden copy is it's when, more along the lines of that archiving or migration, when you move it off of that original spot into its long-term preservation spot, that would be the golden copy because it no longer exists in other areas. So if that's your archive and it's no longer on that primary storage, or if that's your disaster recovery, no longer on that primary storage, if it's something like that, we call it the golden copy because that's where you really have to think about those things like checksums and data integrity and accessibility. So that's kind of the golden part of the golden copy. Would you?
And we oftentimes think of it as kind of a local copy as well, because it gives you the freedom to not be locked into any one area, whether it's a cloud, single cloud provider, the public cloud in general, or some of those other SLA limiting factors. So it's golden copy, yeah, and locally also is a good one for that, just to give you the freedom.
Right. Okay. You guys have earned another 5-minute break from us, so we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to pull this all together into total solution and take a look at what that would look like. So we'll see you in about 4 minutes.